señores, como presidente de Nueva Economía Forum, tengo el placer de darles la bienvenida a esta sesión del Foro de la Nueva Economía que organizamos con la colaboración de KPMG. Hoy tenemos la especial satisfacción de recibir como ponente de esta tribuna a Lord Jonathan Hill, Comisario Europeo de Estabilidad Financiera, Servicios Financieros y Unión de los Mercados de Capitales, que va a ser presentado, y hemos de agradecérselo muy especialmente por don Luis de Guindos, Ministro de Economía y Competitividad del Gobierno de España. Querido Ministro, la tribuna es suya.
Buenos días, es un placer estar de nuevo en este foro, en esta ocasión para presentarles al Comisario Europeo de Estabilidad Financiera, Servicios Financieros y Unión de los Mercados de Capitales, Lord Jonathan Hill. Sin duda, Jonathan está al frente de una de las comisarías más importantes para el futuro de la Unión Europea. Permítame que diga unas breves palabras en inglés para posteriormente continuar mi exposición en castellano. Jonathan combines a strong political career, which includes being leader of the House of Lords, as well as a widespread experience in the private sector. Such combination will certainly help him to successfully achieve his goals in his role as Financial Services Commissioner. I am convinced that he will have the sensitivity required to ensure that the decisions taken in the European Union are transformed into tangible realities that respond to the needs of the European people and companies. Jonathan tiene un mandato fundamental: garantizar estabilidad, competencia y transparencia en los mercados financieros. Y más concretamente, entre los principales proyectos a los que se enfrenta el comisario se encuentra el diseño e implementación de la denominada Unión del Mercado de Capitales. Se trata del paso natural tras la creación de la Unión Bancaria, pero su alcance, si me permiten, es todavía mayor y, por lo tanto, también su complejidad. Su principal objetivo es garantizar una verdadera libertad de movimientos de capitales en el seno de la Unión Europea. Con ello, mejorarán las fuentes de financiación para las empresas europeas y, en especial, para las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Si bien la situación económica en la Unión ha mejorado en los últimos meses, Europa todavía tiene un importante desafío. Ha de aumentar su crecimiento a medio plazo y cerrar el diferencial que mantiene con Estados Unidos. Los progresos en la implementación de reformas estructurales resultan claves, como ha demostrado España. No obstante, también deben realizarse esfuerzos a nivel comunitario. En este sentido, seguir profundizando en la integración europea sentará las bases de un mayor crecimiento a largo plazo. La Unión del Mercado de Capitales es, por lo tanto, un proyecto fundamental para la profundización del mercado interior mediante una mayor integración de los diferentes mercados financieros. En el último ECOFIN, que tuvo lugar en Riga hace unos días, los 28 ministros, junto con el comisario, tuvimos la ocasión de definir las dos grandes prioridades del diseño de la Unión del Mercado de Capitales. En primer lugar, fomentar el desarrollo de fuentes de financiación alternativas a la bancaria. Los instrumentos de financiación no crediticios, al incrementar las fuentes de financiación disponibles para las empresas, pueden, sin duda, elevar el crecimiento potencial de una economía. Esto es especialmente relevante en determinados sectores en los que la financiación bancaria no llega fácilmente. Se trata de los sectores basados en el conocimiento, que generan gran valor añadido y empleo altamente cualificado. Es precisamente en este ámbito donde instrumentos como las titulizaciones sencillas y estandarizadas o la financiación alternativa a través de capital serán esenciales. Existen numerosas opciones distintas a los mercados bursátiles tradicionales que deberían desarrollarse a nivel comunitario: el capital riesgo, el capital semilla o el denominado crowdfunding, entre otros. Además, el papel de la financiación no bancaria cobrará mayor relevancia en el nuevo contexto regulatorio europeo, que supondrá un cambio en la composición de los balances de los bancos. En segundo lugar, estoy convencido de que un mayor peso de la financiación no bancaria contribuirá significativamente a incrementar la estabilidad financiera y macroeconómica. La multiplicidad de fuentes de financiación permite absorber mejor las posibles perturbaciones financieras en una economía. Sirva de ejemplo Estados Unidos, que con un avanzado estado de desintermediación bancaria pudo compensar en gran medida el impacto negativo de la reestructuración de sus bancos realizado en el año 2009 y 2010. Por el contrario, en la Unión Europea, la excesiva dependencia de la financiación bancaria ha supuesto que durante la crisis las restricciones de crédito hayan tenido un mayor impacto en la economía real. Sin embargo, no debemos olvidar que el sector bancario seguirá jugando un papel esencial en la canalización del crédito hacia el sector privado. Por ello, el otro pilar fundamental de la unión del mercado de capitales será la de fomentar una financiación bancaria eficiente. En particular, destacarán las medidas tendentes a mejorar la información sobre las pymes para facilitar el crédito y la confianza. En este sentido, España ha sabido identificar las prioridades y hemos puesto en marcha algunas iniciativas importantes en ambas direcciones. Por una parte, para fomentar el desarrollo de fuentes de financiación alternativa y, por otra, para mejorar la calidad de la financiación bancaria. Concluyo ya. En Europa hemos dado todos la bienvenida a la propuesta del comisario Hill sobre el mercado único de capitales. Una estrategia que combina la recuperación de la capacidad de los bancos para prestar con el fomento de nuevas vías de financiación para las empresas, lo cual, sin duda, es un acierto. Por esta misma senda se abrió el camino de la recuperación de la economía española, que hoy presenta un crecimiento muy por encima del de la media de la Unión Europea, que va a continuar en los próximos años. Los europeos nos encontramos ante un nuevo escenario de crecimiento, pero en el que aún persisten retos importantes por superar. Entre ellos, lograr una mayor integración de los mercados financieros, para lo que será fundamental contar con la labor de comisarios como Jonathan Hill, al que le deseo el mayor de los éxitos. Muchas gracias.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very grateful to Minister de Guindos for his kind words and for the strong support that he has lent me, and to Mr. Rodriguez for the opportunity to speak to you today. And it's a great pleasure to be here at Nueva Economia, which I know has built such a strong reputation over the last 15 years. This is my first visit to Madrid since taking office as European Commissioner. And if my previous visits to Spain have been connected in one way or another with the past, with your rich history or your extraordinarily diverse culture and art, today's visit is about the present and it's about the future. And in particular, about the contribution that a stronger single market in capital could make to Spanish businesses, Spanish entrepreneurs, Spanish SMEs, Spanish savers, and the Spanish economy. In saying that, I am, of course, acutely conscious of the depth of the economic crisis that you've been through, and of the effect that that has had, and still has, on the lives of millions. You've certainly needed the determination and resilience that you've shown at so many points in your history. Europe as a whole is returning to growth, but here in Spain, you're showing us the way. Your economy is growing faster than the EU as a whole, and jobs are being created. Unemployment is falling. And the cleaning up, restructuring, and recapitalization of your banking system has obviously played its part in that. Spain successfully came out of the financial assistance program for its banks a year and a half ago, and the sector passed the recent external assessments and reviews in very good shape, putting Spain's banks in a much better position to lend to the rest of the economy again. And this has been a remarkable achievement. There is still obviously a huge need for more jobs and growth, not just in Spain, but across Europe as a whole, where 24 million people are without work. And the scale of this challenge underlines why we need to build a stronger, more diverse European economy. Now, that, of course, is why jobs and growth are the number one priority of the new European Commission. I think that we're seized by a sense of urgency and a realization that we need to have a new focus and a new way of doing things. And in essence, we want to do fewer things better. And a new structure of vice presidents is helping to encourage more joined-up thinking and a greater focus on a smaller number of political priorities. Our first act, just 3 weeks into the life of the Commission, was to launch the €315 billion investment plan. Spain has showed its support by contributing €1.5 billion to that plan. And you were the second country to contribute, helping to set the trend. And just recently, I was pleased to hear that healthcare research centres in Spain are among the very first projects to be supported by the new European Fund for Strategic Investments. It's this same commitment to growth and jobs which lies behind our new drive on free trade agreements like the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And it's also why we're launching a major new push to expand the single market in energy, in digital services, and my own area of capital markets. Bigger markets, more competition, and more trade will help economic growth and generate more of the jobs that we need. We also have a new drive led by First Vice President Frans Timmermans to regulate only where necessary, to be smaller on the small things and bigger on the big things. And I very much welcome this approach and will be applying it in my own area of financial services. So there will be less new legislation in the future and more focus on bedding in the reforms of recent years. I'm also looking at how we can examine the cumulative effect of what we have introduced in the past, which is something the European Parliament has also called for. Over the last 5 years, we had to legislate at speed while the fires of a crisis were burning all around. And that was a great achievement, in particular, to create a banking union from scratch. And as a result of that, our financial system is stronger, it's better regulated, it's more resilient. So no one is putting into question the new framework which has been put in place. But I do think that now it makes sense to step back and to ask ourselves whether we manage to get everything exactly right all of the time, to take a look at the combined effect of our legislation and check whether we have always struck exactly the right balance between stability and growth. And if the evidence does show that the rules are not proportionate to the risks that they were intended to address, if they are not conducive to growth or are even hampering growth, then I think we should have the confidence to adapt our rules, just as my predecessor did with some of the detailed solvency rules for insurance companies before I took up my post. 5 years ago, the greatest threat to financial stability was the financial crisis. Today, I would argue that the greatest threat to financial stability is the lack of growth and jobs. So if we want to encourage investment in general and long-term investment in infrastructure in particular, then surely it makes sense to look at all the factors that affect it. Now, the investment plan being championed by my colleague Jyrki Katainen should help kickstart growth in the short term. But we also need to encourage investment for the longer term. And that is the thinking that lies behind the work we're doing to build a single market for capital, a capital markets union, for all 28 EU member states. I know how much Spain supports this project, and one of the reasons I was keen to come to Madrid was to hear about some of the initiatives that you've already taken in this area. At its simplest, the purpose of the Capital Markets Union is to increase the availability of capital to the economy and to link savings more effectively to growth. We know that EU capital markets remain underdeveloped. Our equity markets are about half the size of those in the United States. No financing model is perfect, but if we can combine the best of different models, then our system, I believe, will be stronger. In the United States, around a tenth of household assets are tied up in bank accounts. And even in mature and well-developed EU markets, that figure is closer to a third. And in some countries, it would be over a half. And to give another example, medium-sized companies in the United States receive 5 times as much funding from capital markets as they do in the EU. So we think that Europe's capital can and should be put to more productive use. Free movement of capital was, of course, one of the 4 fundamental principles on which the European Union was built. But over half a century on from the Treaty of Rome, we still don't have a fully functioning single market for capital. The market remains fragmented, largely along national lines. And if we can make progress on building that single market, then I think the prize would be considerable. Getting investment flowing more freely would help create more opportunities for SMEs, for infrastructure projects, and for long-term investment. It would help spread risk more effectively and diversify the sources of funding. And as the Spanish experience has painfully shown, economies which are heavily reliant on bank funding are more vulnerable to banking crises. To make progress, we need to remove the obstacles that are currently standing between companies or projects and the financing that they need. We need to increase the range of options available to investors so that Europe's savings, its pension contributions, its investment premiums can be put to more productive use. And we also need to make the system for channeling those funds within the single market more efficient. Getting access to funding remains a pressing concern for Spanish SME owners. And it ought to concern us all, because without sufficient funding for these businesses, our recovery will be stunted and Europe will lag behind on the global economic stage. Although things have improved compared to 2013, around a half of Spanish SMEs which asked for a bank loan last year didn't receive the full amount that they sought. So banking reform is helping banks to return to lending, but it's vital that businesses, especially small ones, are able to have access to the widest possible range of funding options. Different businesses have different needs, and they have different funding needs at different stages of their development. Yesterday, I was lucky enough to meet students at the IE Business School, young people who I have no doubt will be future leaders in Spain and around the world. And I want those young people with their new ideas and their entrepreneurial mindset to be able to raise the funding they need to set up their businesses and get them to grow here in the EU and not to have to go to the United States to get that funding. So how are we approaching our work on Capital Markets Union? My starting point is to build a stronger single market from the bottom up, to work out how we can make existing markets work better. And that's why, with the support of all member states, I'm following a pragmatic, step-by-step approach based on careful analysis. It's also why I started, not by announcing my conclusions, but by launching a 3-month consultation to call for evidence and advice from member states, from the financial services industry, from consumer groups, from NGOs, so that we can identify the barriers and obstacles and then work out how to try to overcome them. We've so far been to 18 countries to seek views. My visit here is part of that process, and we'll have been to all 28 by the summer. And then on the back of this consultation, We'll draw up an action plan set out against a timetable, which I'll publish later this year. Now, this is an ambitious project, and it will require sustained effort over time. It will be much more of a marathon than it will be a sprint. But because it's long-term, doesn't mean that it isn't urgent. And that's why we're combining this step-by-step approach with early measures on securitization, on reviewing the prospectus directive, which I'll be driving forward with a great sense of urgency, and where I intend to make proposals on the same timescale as the overall CMU action plan. So I'll just say a little more about the four main areas that we're looking at. First, we want to improve access to finance to make it easier for creditworthy companies to be able to get the financing that they need. To do that, we're looking at how we can reduce barriers through lowering burdens in the prospectus directive, while also ensuring it provides investors with the protection and information they need. We're looking at what we could do to make SME credit information more accessible to potential investors, which is another area where I know you're working on in Spain. Banks, we think, could help in one key area, namely in giving better feedback to SMEs and pointing small businesses towards alternative types of financing when they judge that a loan is not right for them. We want to diversify sources of finance by unblocking barriers to new channels of financing reaching our companies and our infrastructure projects. So that's why, along with the ECB and the Bank of England, we want to get the market for securitizations going again in Europe, creating a carefully calibrated framework for highly transparent, simple, and standardized products. Despite losses on European securitizations being very low, our markets remain at just 1/3 of the level they were before the crisis. The door will remain firmly shut on the riskier practices of the past. But with the help of the ECB and the Basel Committee, IOSCO and the Bank of England, if we get this right, we could encourage long-term investment by broadening the investor base to include more long-term investors such as insurers and asset managers. Another area we're looking at is how we can improve the ecosystem in Europe for venture capital. If our venture capital markets were as deep as those in the United States, as much as 90 billion extra euros of funds would have been available to finance companies between 2008 and 2013. So we need to look again, not just at the rules for EU venture capital funds, but also the wider picture of equity financing in the EU. We know that we have a huge demographic challenge with people needing to save more for their old age. But if consumers are going to invest more, they need to be able to trust financial products and they need to be able to trust markets. So we need to think about this project from the point of view of the retail investor as well as the institutional investor. So in the coming months, I'll be launching a consultation to understand how we can help consumers benefit from more choice, better service, and keener prices. We're also looking at how capital markets can support more long-term investment. It's already the case that insurers, who are the guardians of 8.5 trillion euros worth of assets, were given a number of incentives for long-term investment in the detailed rules under Solvency II last October. But I think there's more work we can do here, and EIOPA I've asked to look into these issues and to report back to me in June. Private placements also support long-term investment and can help broaden the availability of finance for infrastructure and other projects. And here I welcome the work that's been done by the industry to develop a pan-European market for private placements, and I look forward to seeing the first successful issuances under their new regime. Our consultation also raises thorny issues that we've been grappling with in Europe for decades, such as securities law, taxation, and insolvency. Different countries treat these in different ways, and they usually have good reasons for doing so. But as a result, that might deter investment or create uncertainty. I know that Spain is eager to revive its capital markets and to see results as soon as possible. It started work, as we heard earlier, on revising national legislation on covered bonds, on securitization, on crowdfunding, on credit information. So I think that you're well placed to play a crucial role in building a capital markets union, and I very much hope that you will share your experience and best practice with the Commission and with other member states. Ladies and gentlemen, the Capital Markets Union is a project for all 28 member states, those with developed capital markets and those with less well-developed capital markets. It'll benefit businesses by making it easier for them to raise finance. It will benefit banks, complementing their vitally important role in the economy. It will benefit people saving for their retirement by giving them more affordable investment opportunities. It'll benefit institutional investors like the pension funds and insurance companies by providing more opportunities to invest in long-term projects. It will benefit member states because their businesses will have access to deeper pools of capital on better terms. And it will benefit our financial system as a whole, as it is safer and more sustainable to have a more diverse source of funding for the economy. Now, I think all of those are prizes that are worth fighting for. I've been grateful for the support I've had from the European Parliament and from all member states. I'm particularly encouraged by the feedback I've had here in Madrid, and I feel certain that Spain will have an important part to play in helping us to make progress. I think that it's time to build the next steps in the single market for capital, and I look forward to working with you on that task. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor ministro. Tiene que salir para otros quehaceres. Muchas gracias, comisario Hill. Hay muchas preguntas. Comenzamos. Las nuevas normas MiFID de segundo nivel necesitarán, sin duda, un ajuste difícil de obtener que garantice la transparencia y al mismo tiempo la liquidez de los mercados. La industria financiera es muy consciente del reto que supone. Una vez implantadas las normas de nivel 2, ¿podría contemplarse la entrada de nuevas instituciones no europeas en nuestros mercados? ¿Cree que facilitarían este proceso? También le preguntan, en el contexto del MiFID II, ¿se elimina la capacidad de los intermediarios para ofrecer análisis financiero para mercados, lo que parece un contrasentido con los objetivos de la Unión de Mercados de Capitales en Europa, que protege el desarrollo de la economía financiera a través precisamente de los mercados? ¿Nos puede dar usted su opinión sobre este problema?
Is this working, or do I need to press anything? No, it's working. Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, in terms of investment from outside the EU, yes, part of what we want to encourage is investment coming in from outside as well. We want to get more investment flowing within the EU and also to make it a place that companies from outside want to invest. And to do that, we clearly need to have comparable rules and systems. We can't have a situation whereby there's regulatory arbitrage between different jurisdictions. And so one of the reasons why the negotiations we're having on TTIP look at the question of how you can improve regulatory cooperation between the EU and the United States. On your point about level 2 generally, MiFID, important points about liquidity and about research and other services. The general point, I think that in the implementation of all the level 2 measures. I will do my best to try and balance the requirements to try and make sure that we have as many opportunities for there to be liquidity, for there to be growth, while also wanting to balance that with risk. And I've been clear that in the application of all the very many level 2 measures I've got to take forward, that I will look at them through my overriding preoccupation, which is growth and jobs. In terms of research advice, I mean, we're not seeking to ban that. We're seeking to open the market up. I'm aware of the views that there are around the issue. And again, there is a balancing act that we need to strike. We're looking at that at the moment, and I'll obviously take into account the different perspectives that people put to me.
Según algunos analistas, el disponer de mercados de capitales más amplios e integrados ha permitido a Estados Unidos salir antes y mejor de la crisis que Europa, y en este sentido la iniciativa de unión de los mercados de capitales en la zona euro, promovida por usted, parece necesaria para evitar la fragmentación de los mercados y poder financiar mejor a las empresas, en particular a las pymes. Se ha anunciado una hoja de ruta para este verano. ¿Podría anticiparnos las líneas maestras de esta hoja de ruta y el grado de avance en este momento de la Unión de Mercado de Capitales?
Well, I agree with your analysis that having deeper, more developed capital markets would make us more resilient. We would be less dependent on banking as a source of financing. And everyone, I think, is very well aware that in crude terms, the balance in the EU economy, banking and capital markets, is more or less the opposite of what it is in the United States, and 80-20 and 20-80. And no one is suggesting for one moment that in Europe we can or should be able to kind of switch from a model, our model, to the United States model. But I think it would have some of the benefits that you describe. I think there are a number of reasons separate from that why the United States was able to put measures more quickly into effect. But I take your basic point on that. On the roadmap, I'm hoping to be able to publish that in September. And on that same timescale, we will announce proposals on securitization, and we'll come forward with ideas on how we can review the prospectus directive. And then the other areas we're looking at were the ones that, in broad terms, I mapped out in terms of issues like credit information, venture capital, and so on. But we'll set those out and try to put a number of building blocks in place.
Javier Muñoz Moldes, del Gabinete del Presidente del Gobierno, le pregunta, dada la importancia de las pymes en la economía española, ¿qué planes tiene la Comisión y usted en particular para ayudar a estas pequeñas y medianas empresas a acceder a fuentes de financiación alternativas a las de los bancos?
Well, I think this is one of the key questions that goes to the heart of what we're trying to do, because I think when you go around Europe and you talk to entrepreneurs and innovators, and particularly businessmen who have ideas for higher return but higher risk businesses, I think there is a common concern that they find it hard to get access to funding. And in some countries, the banking system is very good at providing capital for traditional small businesses and safe small business investments, but it's less good at helping entrepreneurs. And I think, therefore, to have a variety of different options alongside the banking option, so it's why we're looking at how can you develop the venture capital market? What can you do with private equity? For some businesses at later stages in their development, maybe they start with private equity and then they want to list. So how can you make that transmission belt of different options for a business available? And for me, that is one of the main purposes of trying to take this project forward. And I think it's one that has relevance and application right across the EU. I mean, I know how important it is here in Spain, and I know the steps that your government and others are already taking. But if you go to some of the newer member states, if you go to the east of Europe, the north of Europe, where they don't have developed capital markets at all, where they don't have a very strong entrepreneurial tradition, they are as keen and interested in these options as more developed markets like Spain.
Enrique Prados, presidente de la Asociación de Mercados Española, dice: la tasa financiera en mercados mayoristas parece que solo pudiera aplicarse en mercados de renta variable, pero aún así podría crear problemas de liquidez importantes y deslocalizaciones indeseadas del mercado europeo. ¿Cree que finalmente no se va a implantar la tasa financiera?
I think that's a question on the financial transaction tax. Only because it was translated as a financial fee, and but I think that's what it must be. Well, as you all know, there are a number of member states who are still taking forward talks, discussions on the financial transaction tax. I have always had the view that if one is doing a financial transaction tax, as is the case with many issues to do with tax, these issues are best addressed at a global level, because otherwise the risk of regulatory arbitrage, I think, is quite considerable. And my overriding preoccupation when I go about my job is to think what I can do to promote growth and jobs. So that would be my starting point. That having been said, there are a number of member states that are working on this, including Spain, I believe. From my point of view, I think that if that idea goes ahead, then people will, I'm sure, want to take into account the possible effect that it might have on the operation of markets. And if we want deeper, better functioning markets, then you need to take that into account when you're thinking about how you might construct a tax.
Seguimos. Concha Salgado dice: los bajos tipos de interés impuestos por el Banco Central Europeo benefician a las familias hipotecadas, a las empresas y a las administraciones endeudadas, pero esta política también tiene su reverso en las compañías que basan su negocio en la compra de deuda pública y privada. El Fondo Monetario Internacional, en su informe semestral sobre estabilidad financiera, pone el foco en el desafío que la política de tipos bajos representa para algunos agentes económicos, especialmente para las compañías de seguros. El señor Viñals, director del Departamento de Asuntos Monetarios del FMI, ha dicho que las compañías de seguros europeas de tamaño mediano que tengan un balance débil podrían afrontar un riesgo creciente de quiebra. Y le pregunta tanto Concha Salgado como Antonio Falcones si nos podría dar su opinión al respecto. Lee Mais también le pregunta: cuando suben los tipos de interés, ¿no habrá grandes tensiones en los mercados?
Well, I think what I have to do with Capital Markets Union is put in place approaches and overcome problems to build for the long term. So this is not a way of responding to short-term circumstances. It's a way of trying to make sure that we've got a broader range of options for the long term. So I think in terms of that, and in terms of the length of time it will take to do things, that is the context in which I need to operate. In terms of the current low interest rate environment and the challenge to financial stability, obviously I understand those concerns, and I think we need to be attentive to those risks. At the same time, given the responsibilities I've got for financial stability, I come back to one of my core points, which is, I think, that one of the greatest challenges we have to financial stability is the fact that we have no growth. And so measures that make it more likely that we get that growth and kickstart the economy and get the growth coming through the whole of Europe, I think we need. I think we shouldn't plan my actions on the Capital Markets Union on the basis that the current circumstances will be the circumstances that we have indefinitely into the future.
Vamos a cambiar por un momento de tema. Carlos Robles dice, hay dos opiniones sobre lo que está pasando con Grecia. Una es que ese país ya ha mostrado que no quiere cumplir sus obligaciones y que hay que cortar la financiación del Banco Central Europeo, aunque ello suponga la salida de Grecia de la zona euro. Y otra es que si Grecia sale del euro, se romperá el principio de que la moneda única es irreversible y esto creará gran inestabilidad en los mercados. Quienes piensan esto dicen que es mejor llegar a un acuerdo con Grecia, aunque sea cosmético y aunque suponga perdonarle sus incumplimientos, en lugar de correr el riesgo de que salga del euro. ¿Cuál es su opinión, señor comisario?
I preface my remarks by saying how conscious I am that I'm giving this answer here in Spain when I am very alive to the sacrifices that Spain went through to sort out its economy and to sort out its banking sector. As I said before, I think that was a remarkable achievement. And I understand, therefore, the feeling of those who think that you need to deliver on a reform program. And that would be very much my view. I think that the two choices you pose me it's not necessarily a kind of either or. I think the position is that the Eurogroup, the Commission, the Greek government are keen to remain in the euro, and I think that's what everyone is seeking to work towards. But in order to do that, people have to deliver on the reform commitments that they have made. So I think the Commission is playing its role of trying to act as a kind of honest broker in the process. But I think everyone's very clear that the speed of the negotiations, the seriousness of the negotiations, have got to accelerate. And I think people are hopeful that the Greeks can deliver on the reforms that they have to deliver on, and that we will have an outcome whereby they remain in the euro, and they remain in the euro on the back of a program of reform.
Antonio Ramos le pregunta, señor comisario, ¿cuál cree usted que es el futuro de la banca digital que postulan entidades españolas como el BBVA, que está caliente con los cambios de ayer en su cúpula? También le preguntan, cambiando un poco de tema, si augura usted nuevas integraciones en Europa y en España y si no será muy difícil para las autoridades europeas controlar y supervisar las entidades de banca digital.
I think it's a very good question that goes to the heart of how I think you have to try to think about regulation, because my starting point on fintech, on crowdfunding, on peer-to-peer lending, on mobile payments would be to be someone who is in favour of innovation. I think you need to have new entrants coming into the market. Incumbents need to be challenged, and people need to have the opportunity to come up with new approaches. Some of those approaches won't work. People will fail, but for me, in a dynamic economy, you need to admit the possibility of failure. Clearly, you need to be sensible in the approach that you take towards regulating those and towards identifying risk. But I would not want to have a situation whereby to reduce risk it had the consequence of stifling the innovation of these new ways of offering services. And these new services reflect how consumers are behaving, and in particular how young people are leading their lives. And different countries have different approaches. Some of the new members of the EU have kind of jumped an evolutionary stage with new technology and the internet because they had no infrastructure before to overcome. Some markets, in terms of banking services, are much more developed than others. So I don't want to, I wouldn't want to snuff out innovation. I think it's healthy, and I think if you move too early to constrain it, you don't see its potential. But at the same time, we need to keep our eyes open. We're looking at issues like crowdfunding in the Commission. I know that Spain is just bringing forward legislation on crowdfunding. So this is an area we keep our eyes on, but my starting point will be to try to enable technological change and better service and the new way that people want to run their lives rather than to frustrate it.
Comisario, al hilo de lo que le preguntaba antes, ¿usted cree que se van a producir a corto o mediano plazo integraciones bancarias en Europa y España, procesos de concentración relevantes?
Yeah, I don't have a fixed view as to what the correct size of banking markets ought to be. I'm sure that some degree of consolidation will carry on in different markets because that will be following the needs of consumers. I hope that the trend that there was towards cross-boundary financial activity, which has retreated on the back of the crisis, can start again, and that's part of what I hope Capital Markets Union can help with. But I would like to have a banking sector and a financial sector that has all different kinds of models. It has big banks able to compete with services globally. It has banks providing services for local communities. It has new challenger banks. So I hope to have an environment in which that development becomes possible, but I don't have a kind of blueprint as to how I think it should develop.
Comisario, le preguntan qué valoración hace usted de la reestructuración de la banca en España y de sus cajas de ahorro en particular. ¿Qué expectativas tiene la Comisión Europea sobre la recuperación de los préstamos dados al Gobierno español para afrontar esta reestructuración?
Well, again, I don't think in terms of what the future holds. I mean, I'm extremely impressed by the work that's been done in the Spanish banking sector generally to sort out its problems, to recapitalize it, to put itself in much better condition. And I think the fact that in the comprehensive assessment, the stress test, Spanish banks came through that in strong shape, I think is greatly to the credit of the Spanish banking sector and the Spanish government which had to undergo those reforms. What happens next internally in Spain, I think I would need to see and watch developments.
Luis Abraira, del Grupo Santander, dice: el desarrollo de los mercados de capitales ha sido mayor donde existen inversores a largo plazo, especialmente fondos de pensiones potentes. ¿Qué recomendaciones haría España dado su insuficiente desarrollo aquí?
Well, I think overall what we're seeking to do with the capital markets is to create the conditions in which insurance companies and others, pension funds, are able to operate in an environment where there is the atmosphere is more conducive to people making those long-term investments. So part of that, I think, is to do with the rules that there are around Solvency II, for example. Some of it is to do with the new European long-term investment funds and making those attractive to people to invest in. I think there are a range of measures. I think one of the areas we're looking at is the possibility of a 29th regime for a pension product. But I think it's to do with trying to create an environment across Europe. I think if people have particular suggestions or recommendations based on their experience in Spain, one of the things I'm extremely keen on is that we get the benefit of people's experience from around different markets. We understand properly how different markets work and can learn from that experience and take that into account, because one of the things I don't want to do with the Capital Markets Union is disrupt existing markets that are working well.
Las dos últimas preguntas, señor comisario. Laura López, de La Sexta, dice: ¿cree, como asegura el Gobierno de España, que nuestra economía ha despegado teniendo en cuenta los datos del paro que se han conocido hoy? Israel García Juez, de Promecal, dice: señor Hill, ¿le gustaría y, por tanto, apoyaría la candidatura del señor de Guindos como presidente del Eurogrupo?
Well, he's not here now, so I can tell you what I think. No, that will obviously be, that's quite rightly a decision for members of the Eurogroup, who I'm sure will choose wisely. All I can observe from my point of view, from my exchanges with Mr. de Guindos, is that he's clearly an extraordinarily strong an effective minister, and I'm sure alongside others potentially he would do the job outstandingly well, and I've been very encouraged by all the conversations I've had with him on Capital Markets Union in particular, but economic issues more generally. On the question of the Spanish economy, do I think it's taking off? Well, I think really quite properly that is a question for the Spanish government. I think if you look at the figures, I think the growth figures are impressive, and I think that the Spanish economy is clearly growing, as I said, faster than is the case in other EU countries. Unemployment is falling. I'm very aware, though, that it is still extraordinarily high, and for those people who are out of work and have been out of work for a long time, particularly young people, you can't be blind to, immune to that cost. But I think if the question is how is the Spanish economy growing, as I say, I think the figures in terms of the growth and the recovery speak for themselves. I know it's been a very difficult process that Spain collectively has been through, but I would say if you look at those figures, and I'm not blind to the personal cost of people, but if you look at those figures, the figures speak for themselves.
Don Francisco Uría, socio responsable del sector financiero de KPMG en España, va a despedir el acto.
Muchas gracias.
Buenos días a todos. Es un placer para KPMG tener la oportunidad de participar en este acto como patrocinadores. Creo que el éxito de la jornada y su participación está fuera de toda duda. I would like to really thank you, Mr. Commissioner Lord Hill, for being here in Madrid, also for taking time in your visit to have many and very diverse conversations and meetings with many people here in Spain, different institutions, different companies. And I have seen in your speech and in the answer to the questions the real flavor on the knowledge you have on the Spanish situation and the sensibility. So thank you for that. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the Commission for the work they have done in the past, and especially in 2012. I think for Spain has been important the work you have done, especially in that year that was very difficult for us. The creation of the banking union was really important for us, and I think it's fair to recognize and thank the Commission and its technical services. We have Mario Nava there that was important in that work. So thank you very much indeed. So I think it was key in the recovery of the Spanish economy and also for the financial sector. And now I switch off to Spanish para decir que, querido secretario de Estado, presidente de la Comisión Nacional del Mercado de Valores, secretaria general del Tesoro, presidente del FROB, queridos amigos, yo creo que hemos tenido una jornada realmente interesante. Gracias al Foro de la Nueva Economía y a José Luis Rodríguez por darnos la oportunidad de participar en ella. Creo que realmente las palabras del señor comisario nos evidencian claramente que nos encontramos en un momento claramente distinto al de la legislatura europea anterior. El foco está puesto ahora en el crecimiento y la creación de empleo. Creo que la unión bancaria y la unión de los mercados de capitales no son alternativos, creo que son complementarios y que creo que los bancos tienen un papel absolutamente central en la financiación empresarial y sobre todo en la financiación de la pequeña y mediana empresa, y en ese sentido pues todos tenemos la esperanza de que estas nuevas iniciativas a lo que nos conduzcan es algo que realmente a la crisis no nos ha quitado, sino que nunca hemos llegado a tener, que es un auténtico mercado interior de servicios financieros, ¿no? Y yo creo que las lecciones de la crisis deberían llevarnos a de verdad ser capaces de construir y conseguir pues, un mercado único en el que los consumidores se beneficien de las mejores condiciones posibles en los mercados y los bancos, y entre ellos los bancos españoles, pues tengan una oportunidad de convertirse en grandes bancos europeos. Y yo creo que eso sería muy importante para todos nosotros, ¿no? No puedo estar más de acuerdo con sus palabras respecto a la necesidad de aprovechar este momento, no para seguir avanzando en nueva regulación después del gran esfuerzo que se ha hecho, sino en evaluar el efecto acumulado de todas las reformas y toda la nueva regulación que ya se ha aprobado y sobre todo su contribución a esa agenda de crecimiento y de creación de empleo. Yo creo que este es un buen momento para recapitular y ver que el efecto acumulado de todas esas reformas es realmente muy importante, ¿no? Y respecto de la Unión del Mercado de Capitales, no me resisto a hacer un comentario muy personal como antiguo miembro de los grupos de expertos de la Comisión Europea en el ámbito de la remoción de las barreras fiscales y legales al desarrollo de los mercados de capitales en Europa, y es sobre la importancia de las barreras de carácter fiscal y la importancia de la cooperación de los Estados en este ámbito. Yo creo que ahora estamos en un momento en el que los Estados disponen de instrumentos de cooperación en materia fiscal muy desarrollados y concretamente en materia de intercambio automático de información, etcétera, etcétera. Y yo creo que todo eso tiene que ponerse al servicio también de construir unos mercados de capitales más sencillos y con menos exigencias formales que al final terminan convirtiéndose en un obstáculo para la inversión. En cualquier caso, yo creo que la buena noticia es que en el conjunto de Europa y en España estamos en un momento diferente, que estamos iniciando claramente el camino del crecimiento y la creación de empleo, y yo creo que, como hemos visto, pues la Comisión está poniendo todas las medidas y todas las iniciativas necesarias para contribuir a que esa nueva agenda de crecimiento y de creación de empleo sea una realidad. Así que muchísimas gracias y muchísimas gracias a todos por venir.